The fence was not supposed to be a weapon. It was supposed to scare an old farmer into selling. But by noon on the first Saturday of October, Harold Brigg was standing in front of 12 investors, a county deputy, and the most expensive mistake of his career, staring at a 7.5-foot wall that cut clean across the entrance road to his new lakeside resort. The wall did not lean. It did not apologize. It ran straight through the blacktop, over the edge of a freshly poured curb, across the corner of the putting lawn, and stopped exactly where the county survey stakes said Calvin Mercer's land stopped. Part was not the wall. The worst part was the paper nailed to it. Because every board in that fence had been built under an order Harold Brigg had personally signed. Calvin Mercer first saw the order on a Tuesday morning in 1982, when a burgundy Lincoln Town car rolled up the gravel lane to his orchard outside Bellwether, Missouri. Calvin was 71 years old, narrow through the shoulders now, with hands that had spent so many decades pruning apple trees they seemed permanently shaped around a blade. His orchard sat on the north slope above Lake Wren.
36 acres of old trees, limestone breaks, a weathered packing shed, and a farmhouse that had been in the Mercer family since Calvin's grandfather still measured roads by horse time. The town had changed around him. The feed store had become an insurance office. The old mill had become an antique mall. And the ridge beyond the lake, once cow pasture, had become the dream of men who use words like destination, membership, and lifestyle. Harold Brigg was the loudest of those men. He was mayor of Bellwether, owner of Brigg Development, and the kind of man who shook your hand as if he were already checking how much pressure it would take to move you. He had bought the lakefront pasture 2 years earlier and announced Wren Harbor Club, a private resort with townhomes, tennis courts, a restaurant, and a marina for people who wanted country quiet without having to smell anyone's cattle. There was only one problem. The best view in the whole project belonged to Calvin Mercer. Harold had offered to buy him out twice. Calvin had said no, twice. Not angrily, not dramatically, just no. So Harold came with paper. He stepped out of the Lincoln wearing a camel-colored overcoat and shoes that had no business on gravel. His assistant stayed in the car with the engine running. "Mr. Harold said, holding out a cream envelope stamped with the town seal. "Municipal compliance notice." Calvin wiped apple sap from his thumb with a rag and took the envelope. Harold did not bother making it friendly. "Your eastern boundary borders a recreational development now. Under Ordinance 22-B, any active agricultural property adjacent to a licensed public accommodation is required to install a continuous privacy barrier. 7 feet 6 inches minimum height, opaque, treated timber, stone or concrete footing, full length of the shared boundary, 30 days. Calvin looked at the envelope, then at Harold's clean car. "Full length," Harold repeated. "If you fail to comply, the town can assess daily penalties. If the violation continues, we can seek a nuisance finding." There it was, not a request, a trap. Calvin could almost hear the hinges closing. A proper barrier would cost more than he had in the farm account. Refusing would let Harold call him non-compliant. Fighting would mean lawyers, hearings, and money Calvin needed for fuel, taxes, and the cold storage compressor that was already making a sound he did not like. Harold smiled in a way that never reached his eyes. "I imagine this is inconvenient," he said. Calvin folded the envelope once and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Most things are," he said. That evening, Calvin spread the order across the kitchen table beneath the yellow light over the sink. His granddaughter Nora sat across from him, still wearing her work boots from the packing shed. She was 24, restless, sharp, and angry in the immediate way young people are angry when they have not yet learned how slowly unfairness likes to move. "This is extortion," she said. "He can't just invent a wall because you won't sell."
He didn't invent it, Calvin said. He tapped.
Nora read the specifications out loud. 7 feet 6 inches high. Hardwood posts not less than 5 inches across. Opaque boards with no visible gaps. Stone or concrete footing no less than 30 inches deep. Timber treated with a county-approved preservative. She stopped and looked at him. Grandpa, this is thousands of dollars. Calvin nodded. And if we build it, he gets exactly what he wants. A giant wall making the orchard look ugly from the road. He'll tell buyers you're the problem. Calvin said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the orchard was dark except for the pole light by the shed. Wind moved through the trees with that dry October sound, leaves rubbing against leaves like old paper. Then Calvin took off his glasses and folded them carefully. Nora, he said, when a man writes a rule because he thinks you won't survive it, don't argue with the rule first. She frowned. What do? Calvin slid the notice back into the envelope. You find out exactly what the rule says. He stood, reached for the black rotary phone beside the bread box, and dialed a number from memory. The woman who answered was Mabel Rusk. Mabel had been the county surveyor for 28 years before she retired, and there were people in 3 townships who trusted her measurements more than they trusted their own relatives. She lived in a white house behind the courthouse with a shed full of rolled maps, transit tripods, deed books, and coffee cans filled with brass markers. Calvin did not waste words. Mabel, he said, I need to know where my Eastern mine is. She was quiet for half a second. Your fence line or your deed line? Calvin smiled for the first time that day. That's why I called you. They started at the courthouse. Morning. Calvin, Nora, and Mabel sat in the records room, while rain ticked against the high windows. They pulled deeds from drawers, unfolded plats that smelled like dust and cloth, and followed descriptions written by men who had described land by creek bends, walnut trees, and stones large enough for a teamster to rest upon. The Mercer deed went back to 1871. The old split-rail fence on the eastern side did not. It had been repaired, moved, patched, and straightened by 3 generations of men who cared more about keeping cattle out of apple trees than about legal precision. A rail had shifted around a sinkhole in the 1930s. A corner had been moved after a flood in the 1950s. Everybody recognized was not the line the deed described. Mabel read the original call 3 times. Then she looked up. Calvin, she said, did Brigg put his entrance road along the old fence? Looks that way. Mabel closed the book. Then bring coffee. This may take a while. For 2 days they measured. Mabel set her transit on the slope above Lake Wren, while Nora held the rod in the weeds and Calvin carried stakes in a 5-gallon bucket. They worked through mist, then sun, then the hard blue cold that comes after rain in October. Mabel was 74 and moved slowly, but when she looked through an instrument, every bit of slowness disappeared. Rough an instrument, every bit of slowness disappeared. She called numbers. Nora wrote them down. Calvin drove stakes where Mabel told him. By late afternoon on the second day, orange flags ran down the hill in a line that looked wrong to anyone who trusted the old fence. It crossed Harold's new asphalt road by 16 feet. It clipped the corner of his model home parking area, and it cut straight through a landscape strip where his brochure promised a grand arrival view of the lake. Nora stood with her hands on her hips, staring at the flags. That's ours. Mabel pulled off her gloves. Glee, yes. But he already paved it. That's not a measurement. Calvin looked at the new road, the fresh curb, the painted stakes for ornamental lights, and the machines parked beyond them. Harold had not stolen the land with a gun or a fence. He had stolen it the modern way, by assuming the old man would be too tired to check. Calvin took the municipal notice from his coat pocket and read the wording one more time. Full length of the shared boundary, not the old fence. Not the convenient line, the shared boundary. He looked at Mabel. Can you certify this? I already wrote the affidavit in my head, she said. Ed, she said. A legal fence is expensive when you buy everything from a lumberyard. Calvin did not. He called in old favors. At the abandoned cider mill on County Road F, there were stacks of oak beams left from a collapsed press house. The owner wanted them gone. At the abandoned railroad spur, there were retired bridge timbers, dense and black from age, still sound where it mattered. From Calvin's own creek bed came limestone flat enough to seat a footing if a man was patient. Preservative came in dented drums from a farm auction. Legal under the old county standard, and foul enough to make your clothes smell for 3 days. But he was impossible. Then she started bringing him coffee before he asked. They spent evenings cutting, sorting, and stacking. The work was ugly and exact. Beams had to be trimmed. Stones had to be sorted. Boards had to be planed enough to fit tight. Calvin measured twice, then again, because spite was cheap, but compliance had to be perfect. By the 4th week, the orchard yard looked like a small fort being assembled from salvaged history. Neighbors began to notice. One came by with a post-hole auger. Another came with a flatbed. 2 brothers from the next ridge appeared one morning with gloves, and said they had heard Calvin was building, one of them, government fences. Nobody gave speeches. They just worked. They began at the south corner on a gray Monday before sunrise. Mabel's certified stakes were still in the ground. The court filing had been stamped 2 days earlier. The line was no longer rumor, memory, or neighborly habit. It was a legal fact. The auger chewed into the frozen rim of earth. Limestone went down. Concrete followed. Posts rose, dark and wet with preservative. Rails locked between them. Boards went up tight enough that sunlight disappeared behind them, one blade at a time. By Wednesday afternoon, the wall reached Harold's Road. Nora stopped with a board under one arm. "Are we really doing this?" Calvin set his level against the post. "Nora, where is this post?" She looked down at Mabel's orange flag, then at the certified copy folded in her coat. "On our land. And what did the town order?" "A barrier along our boundary." Calvin nodded. "Then hold that board straight." The first post through the road went into a saw-cut hole in the asphalt. The road went into a saw-cut hole in the asphalt. The footing stone sat where Harold's contractors had painted a yellow centerline only 3 weeks earlier. A deputy slowed his cruiser at the end of the lane and watched for a minute. He did not get out. By the next morning, half the town knew. By the following afternoon, men who had not agreed on politics, church budgets, or school football in years were standing in Calvin's orchard handing boards upward, in a silence that felt almost ceremonial. The wall rose across the road like a sentence being written in timber. 7 feet 6 inches tall, dark oak, limestone base, no gaps, no shortcuts, no trespass. On the 7th day, Calvin drove the last nail, stepped back, and checked the line from end to end. The fence did not look angry. That was what made it powerful. It looked final. Harold Brigg saw it for the first time, with investors beside him. He had scheduled the Wren Harbor Club preview for Saturday at 10. A charter bus came from St. Louis carrying bankers, contractors, and 2 men from a hospitality group who had already asked about buying into Phase 2. Harold had banners printed. He had coffee service at the sales trailer. Photographer waiting near the marina. What he did not have was a road. The bus turned onto Harbor Lane, rolled up the hill, and stopped. At first Harold thought something had fallen. Then he understood the shape of it. A wall. His entrance road disappeared into a wall of black timber that crossed it with brutal neatness. The fresh asphalt continued on the other side where no vehicle could reach it. Beyond the fence, through no visible gap, lay the lake view he had sold in every brochure. One investor took off his sunglasses. "Harold," he said, "why is there a wall across the road?" Harold's project manager, a pale young man named Dennis, said nothing. To call Harold 3 times that week. Harold had told him not to bother him with orchard drama. Harold walked to the fence. There, at eye level, inside a plastic sleeve nailed to the boards, was a certified survey from Mabel Rusk, recorded at the county courthouse. Behind it was a copy of the Mercer deed from 1871. Behind that was Harold's own compliance order, signed in blue ink. And behind that was a letter from Calvin's attorney. The letter was polite. That made it worse. It stated that the privacy barrier had been constructed fully within Calvin Mercer's recorded property boundary and in compliance with Ordinance 22-B, Y, and in compliance with Ordinance 22-B. It further stated that portions of Harbor Lane, the model home parking pad, and the landscaped entry strip appeared to occupy Mercer property without easement, lease, purchase, or permission. The hospitality man read over Harold's shoulder. "How much of your entrance is on his land?" Harold did not answer. The photographer lowered his camera. The bus idled. The wall stood. By noon, Harold was at Calvin's farm with a deputy and a face gone red at the edges. Calvin was in the packing shed rinsing apple bins. He finished the bin he was on before walking outside. "You destroyed my road," Harold said. His wet gloves. "No, I built your fence." "My fence?" "The town's fence, the one your office ordered." Harold jabbed a finger toward the hill. "That is not where the fence was supposed to go." Calvin looked at him quietly. "It is where the boundary is." The deputy, a careful man named Wills, accepted the envelope Calvin handed him. He read the survey, the deed, the filing receipt, and the municipal notice. Harold kept talking. "You think this is clever? You think an old map lets you block a permitted development?" Calvin did not raise his voice. "I think a permitted development ought to know where it is." The deputy looked up from the papers. "From the papers. Mayor," he said slowly, "this appears to be a civil property matter." "It's vandalism." The deputy glanced toward Calvin. "Was the fence built on Mr. Mercer's land?" "That's not the point." "It may be the whole point." That sentence did more damage than shouting could have. For the first time, Harold looked less like a man giving orders, and more like a man hearing a machine start up that he did not know how to stop. The investors did not wait for court. They waited for title insurance. Then the title insurer waited for a boundary opinion. Then the bank waited for the title insurer. By the time everyone had finished waiting, Wren Harbor Club was frozen in the most expensive season of the year. Crews left. The sales trailer sat dark. The banners sagged in the rain. Weeds came up along the curb of a road that went nowhere. Harold's attorney tried every argument that sounded powerful. The old fence had been recognized for decades. Development relied on visible possession. The barrier interfered with commerce. The town had not intended for the ordinance to create an obstruction. Calvin's attorney answered with the same three facts every time. The deed line was the deed line. The road crossed it. The mayor ordered the barrier to be built along it. In December, the county judge did not give a speech. He did not need one. He confirmed the boundary. He denied the emergency request to remove the fence. He advised the parties to negotiate access or redesign the entrance. And he noted, with the dry patience of a man who had read the entire file, that the town could not penalize a citizen for obeying the exact written order it had issued. Harold resigned as mayor before spring. The official reason was business obligations. Nobody believed it. The settlement came quietly. Harold's company bought a narrow easement for more money than the strip of land had ever been worth, paid damages for unauthorized use, and covered Calvin's legal costs. The entrance road had to be rebuilt with a curve so awkward that every car entering Wren Harbor slowed down in front of the Mercer orchard, whether Harold liked it or not. Calvin did not sell. He replaced the cold storage compressor. He paid the back taxes before they became a conversation. Bought Nora a used pickup for orchard deliveries, and pretended it was because the old one had bad brakes. And the fence stayed. Not because Calvin needed it anymore. Because the order had never been withdrawn. Years later, people still slowed down on Harbor Lane to look at it. The resort eventually opened under a new name with new owners, and its brochure stopped mentioning uninterrupted lake views. The fence weathered from black to dark brown. Moss worked into the limestone base. Apple blossoms fell against it every April. In summer, it held heat. In winter, it caught snow on the north side and made a long white shelf under the rails.
Strangers, it was just an odd wall in the wrong place. To everyone who knew the story, it was a reminder. Power often arrives wearing a nice coat and carrying paper. It expects fear. It expects exhaustion. It expects the people in its way to shout, beg, or make one desperate mistake. Calvin Mercer did none of those things. He read the paper, he found the boundary. He did the work exactly right. And when Harold Brigg handed him a weapon disguised as an ordinance, Calvin did not swing it wildly. He measured it, he squared it, he set it in stone. Then he let Harold walk straight into it.